Hello, I'm David Duty, Superintendent of City Schools of Decatur, and I'd like to take a couple minutes to walk you through the current version of our fiscal year 22 budget. As of today, when I'm recording this, February 15th of 2021. I'm going to talk through the timeline of what we have done and where we will be doing things with the budget. I want to talk a little bit about our old approach to budgeting and what our new approach looks like, some of the goals we try to achieve in budgeting, and then I want to walk through the latest draft as of today, February 15th. So you've seen a timeline document like this if you've looked at budgets. I know you can't read it. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail of things relevant to this discussion. So up until December, the administrative team worked on a draft budget using various information and needs and brought to a initial draft of a budget to the board back at the start of January. The board has had 4 discussions, January 7th, 12th, 27th, and February 9th, on various iterations of a draft budget. We will be discussing the budget again February 23rd and March 9th. And then the board will adopt a tentative budget April 13th and a final budget May 12th. Those future dates are subject to change, but that's the plan as of right now. Millage rate goes right along with board budget. Millage rate is the rate that sets the collection of taxes. So the board will adopt a tentative millage rate June 8th. They'll have first and second millage rate hearings June 15th, and July 13th, they'll have a third millage rate hearing and adopt a final millage rate. Now, all of that is contingent on a change to the millage rate, which is not a foregone conclusion at this time. But if it does result in any increase in taxes being collected, we'll go through that process. So let's talk a little bit about the old approach to how we approached budgeting in the past and how we have transitioned moving forward. So previously, we used to plan for very high fund balances, and we planned extremely conservatively. And you'll see this in one of our upcoming graphs. I'll show you an example. In general, we planned as though we would keep the millage rate fixed, and we would make the fund balance the variable, with it going up and down according to what taxes were collected. And we did not really look at multi-year planning. In our new approach to budgeting, we aim for fund balances right around 10%. The board policy is for fund balances to be between 4 and 15%, and so we aim right for the middle. We still plan a little bit conservatively because we don't want to run out of money for the things we plan, but we don't plan to extremes. We generally keep the fund balance fixed at around 10%, and we make the millage rate the variable within reason, of course, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And we started, in our new approach, we have started producing multi-year projections so we can see the impact over time. So just real briefly, some of our high-level goals when we do budgeting. One, of course, is to meet student needs. It's why we exist. It's why we collect taxes. It's why we do what we do. We, of course, want to use funds responsibly, and we want to plan for the future. So let's talk a little bit about the latest draft of the budget as of February 15th. So as I shared previously, we used to plan for very high fund balances, and you can see here they were in the about 19 to 29% range. We always ended up having a lot of extra money at the end of the year, and then we'd end up spending it later, and it just wasn't, it didn't feel like a good way to do budgeting. And so we have adopted a new method where we aim for about 10% unspent balance. And so you can see here and on future slides, the FY21 budget, as of right now, we are projecting right around 10%. Just a quick note about our millage rate history. You can see that for several years from 2016 to 2019, we left the millage rate fixed at 18.66. And we only have changed it once in the last several years when we jumped up in 2020. So in general, millage rate is fairly stable. It's a fairly tight range if you look at the range there, but it's something that we're always very conscientious about. So in this latest FY22 budget draft, there are a couple things that we have been able to take into account. One is that it looks like for FY21 and 22, the austerity cuts are going to be reduced. So that impacts the current budget we're in and next year's budget that we're planning. We also have heard of news for $1,000 bonuses for certain employees, which will take place in the current school year. And that will, as we understand it, be pretty much pass-through money. We'll get the money from the state, we'll give it to those employees. And then it looks like there may be a potential loss of about $127,000 if Senate Bill 59 passes, which would impact our funding as a charter system. So this is a multi-year budget, like I was talking about earlier, and you don't have to try to read it. I'm going to jump in and show you a couple key things from this budget. So in fiscal year 21, that's the current budget we have right now. As of right now, this is what the revenue sources look like. If you look where the arrow is, you'll see an austerity reduction of about $1.3 million. The reasons that's significant is because that was over $3 million in the middle of this year when the austerity cuts were first announced. And it looks like we are going to be able to get some of that money back. And so that will have a positive impact on our fund balance. We're still losing funding of 1.3 million, but not as much as we had previously had to budget for. Our expenditures are fairly similar to what they typically would be, except there are quite a few expenses related to additional staffing needs, additional equipment and supplies related to COVID, and that's reflected in these numbers. And then you'll see here that we are now projecting a 9.6% fund balance at the end of this current year, which ends June 30th. One of the things to note is in previous versions of this, that was actually quite a bit lower. For a while, when we first started this process, it looked like we would have no fund balance left at the end of the year due to all of the additional COVID expenses. So some of the parameters that we used in building our FY22 budget that we're looking at here is that the austerity reductions will be partially restored for both the current fiscal year and next fiscal year. We use property tax revenue projections from Georgia State University's study. All of those one-time amendments related to COVID have been removed from the FY22 preliminary budget. And so anything that we do not anticipate having to continue, such as additional staff for specialized positions, have been removed. And the teacher retirement system has passed on a mandatory increase of 0.75% for fiscal year 22. The enrollment projections we used are based on enrollment projections from Cooperative Strategies, who we contract with each year, and they are relatively stable. We have included remediation programs in the FY22 budget, which we have some more details in some of our board meeting materials, as well as in some of our frequently asked question materials if you want some details. In this version of the budget, we wanted to see what would happen if we did give a step increase and a 2% cost of living adjustment to all of our different salary schedules. And so part of our goal as a district is to be very competitive with salaries. And so we wanted to see what it would take in order to give this step increase in cost of living adjustment at times when other districts may not be, so we could catch up and get in the top 3, which is our goal. And then again, we, in this version of the budget, we look at what would the millage rate have to be in order to maintain a fund balance of 10%. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So here's the the current draft of the fiscal year 22 budget. And again, you can see that this is a little better than some previous drafts because the austerity reduction is again not as big as what we were first anticipating. So that is helpful. They're still reducing by about $1.3 million, but it's better than over $3 million that we were planning for. The salaries and benefits and other services have all of the different COVID-related expenses removed, like I spoke about earlier, as well as those cost of living adjustment and step increases. So you can see here that in order to maintain a fund balance of around 10%, we would have to raise the millage rate to 24.5 with all of these parameters in place. I don't think anybody wants to raise a millage rate to 24.5. And so what we'll do in future versions of the budget is we'll look at some options for how to stick with that 10% without having to raise the millage rate that much, such as maybe not doing as big as the cost of living adjustment or looking at some other options for how to control expenses. This is the multi-year version of what the fund balance would look like. And you can see in this version of this draft, we're aiming for that 10% unspent balance. And we have a flexible millage rate, which you already saw one of the years goes up to 24.5. It comes back down to about 22. Most likely those are higher than what we would be interested in doing throughout the course of the next several years. And so that will be a big topic of discussion as we move forward looking at future drafts. So some of the challenges we faced as we have gone through this budgeting process was the initial 10% austerity cuts, which have been restored slightly. Those increased expenses due to COVID-19 have been extreme. We don't currently have final decisions from the state on how public schools will be funded for FY22, and we're not quite sure about what operating in a pandemic will look like in the future as we plan for FY22. So our next step, we will have several more budget iterations, as you saw in that initial timeline that I presented. We will get some more certainty as our legislative session proceeds, and we will start to learn a lot more about the state budget and what that's going to look like and how it will impact us. We will adopt a tentative budget. We're planning to adopt that in April, and a final budget in May. If you're interested in looking at all the different iterations of the budgets that we've gone through, here are some quick links that you can use to go right to the budget items for the 4 board meetings at which they have been discussed so far. There you will find attachments that have the specifics related to each budget and can show the different numbers that I referred to through this presentation. So there's a quick update as of February 15th. We hope you found this helpful, and we encourage you to continue participating in our board meetings, listening to our discussions there, reviewing documents, and sending us your comments and questions. So thank you very much. Hope you have a great day.